Welcome to episode 3 of the Carlson Cards podcast, where we interview longtime collectors and learn from their strategies and ways they go about navigating the sports card hobby. My name's Austin. I'll be your host. I am really looking forward to this discussion today, and I hope you guys are as well. I just finished recording with our guest today. Literally just incredible discussion. This is probably the least amount I've ever talked in my life in an hour, and for good reason. There are so many gems that the guest today shares, and just really I implore you, listen to the whole thing, especially when we get to the end and talk about his cards and the way he went about acquiring them. There's just so many nuggets of good information that you can use. Whether your budget is $100 a month, $10 a month, $1,000 a month, it doesn't matter. Just listen to this guy, take in the information like a sponge, and be sure to take some notes. All right, let's get over to the episode. Welcome everyone to episode 3 of the Carlson Cards podcast. Very excited for today's guest. He's a man of many names. I'm going to give him the Daenerys Targaryen intro. So it's Chris of the House of Jordans, first of his name, curator of cardboard, defender of data, champion of all that is good and holy in the hobby. Chris, how are you doing?
Nice. You came up with all those?
Oh yeah, creative. Well, my wife helped. She's the creative mind in our little relationship here. So
I was gonna say, must have taken at least 2 minds. That's good. I'm very happy to be here. Congratulations on the launch of your podcast. I'm looking forward to checking out all the episodes, and I wish you the best of luck on it.
Thanks, man. That means a lot, especially, we chatted a little bit before this. I followed you for a long time. Obviously, I followed your guys' stuff. And then, I started, just for background too, making YouTube videos maybe like, let's say 6-7 months ago, just stuff I liked, like PSA reveals stuff. I'm sure kind of how you and Josh originally started. And then I realized some of these questions I'm getting in the comments, I'm like, oh my God, I've only been here for like 2 years. How do I answer these questions? I'm learning from these guys. So I'm like, you know what, how about I talk to Brett, talk to Chris, get some of these guys on like a long form discussion. So that's kind of inspiration here. And again, happy to have you. Could you give kind of like a high level of your entry back to the hobby? Maybe what has kind of been your take on the whole thing? I mean, just do a Chris Hodge, just run with it here. I'm just curious just to hear everything.
Okay, so I started collecting as a kid in the 90s, and then I came back in 2016 as I was just turning 29 or 30 roughly. And the hobby at that time was a blank canvas in many ways, not as much or relative to today is what I mean to say. It felt like much more of a blank canvas in the following ways. There was very little content, so there would be some YouTube videos of people showing their collections. There were places online to go and watch card breaks if you wanted to do that. And there were some social media accounts, I think, spread out here and there. There certainly was a card Instagram community, and there were some Facebook groups, and they were, maybe had a few hundred, maybe a few thousand people on the high end. And it was nice, but it was small. All of this is relative today. It was small, and it wasn't filled with anybody sort of looking to impose their viewpoint on it. It really just felt like much more of a blank canvas. And then blowout forums were very influential. That was a place where I would go and do all of the reading I could, especially on topics of interest to me, which was like 90s cards, and in particular Michael Jordan 90s cards. So that was a really interesting, nascent time relative to today. And I don't want to take away from the fact that, remember at this time, Optic is being introduced, and Panini is really starting to hit its stride, and some pretty exciting rookie classes are starting to come down the pike. Ben Simmons, and then the following year with Tatum and Mitchell, and there's starting to be some. There's a momentum building on that side, and then also there's just a common thread that I saw, especially in Michael Jordan collecting, was just so many people similar to my age or usually older who were just coming back to the hobby. They had collected in the 80s or in the 90s, and they were coming back and they were rediscovering it. And the usual story was, they stopped collecting when they went to college, and then they became occupied with building families and careers and jobs. And then, they got to the point where they settled in, and they settled into a career, they settled into a family. Kids are getting a little bit older, and they went back to the hobby. They rediscovered it one way or another, and they came back. And this is all happening, 2016, 17, 18. I remember one of the first things that happened in 2016 was there was this, I don't know if it was market manipulation or if it was just totally organic or a mix of both, but there was a crazy price run on vintage cards like Roberto Clemente and rookies, and Michael Jordan 86 Fleer, and like late 80s and early 90s wax and stuff. And there and probably more that I just didn't really have an eye on, but like I certainly remember it happening for like 80s basketball and Michael Jordan rookies and stuff. And there was like this surge in value for this stuff, where like the Jordan PSA 10 rookie got up to around $40,000, which was really high for back then. And then it came all the way back down to like 20 grand towards the end of that year. But like I was, as soon as I came back into the hobby, that was one of the first things I saw, was I witnessed this volatility, this bubble, this moment where that happened. And then it corrected, but there was this steady build, this energy that you could just sort of feel was building among these people returning to the hobby. And you just could kind of feel Panini mastering their product, honing their craft, getting better as they went along. And then, so I was heavily focused on collecting Michael Jordan cards, decided to start a podcast a few years into it. And this was around the same time that other podcasts were starting or had already started. So some of the ones that already existed were like 90s B-ball cards by Jake Roy on YouTube. That was one that I would never miss an episode of, because it was just 90s card, content, which I loved. There was Cardboard Chronicles, where Josh would be interviewing collectors, and like that, I just got so much energy listening to other collectors be interviewed about their collections and their collecting approaches and philosophies. I loved those episodes, everyone that would come out. We started the House of Jordans podcast right around the same time in late 2018 that Kyle from Wax Museum started his podcast. So like there was like a little group of us who were beginning to make content focus on basketball card collecting that was like regular and routine and scheduled. And we all would, work with each other or collaborate or at least support each other's content. And, you just kind of felt things building, people filling in the canvas with colors, and just continuing to see more people pour in. But there was still a decent amount of infrastructure. You still had multiple auction houses, but they weren't running monthly high-end auctions or anything like that. It was much slower, much more spread out. Almost everything took place on eBay, which was like a central hub, which was very convenient, honestly. Now it's much more complicated. I have to have half a dozen accounts with my credit card information on file with all these different companies. Like, it was nice. There was a simplicity that was really nice too. And then you had like this trifecta, this Bermuda Triangle, this trinity of events that happens in 2020, which was first Kobe's passing, second the COVID-19 pandemic starting and stay-at-home orders being enforced, and then the suspension of all sports and the Last Dance documentary being rushed to release to fill the airtime, to fill the airwaves, as there was no live sports. And so, that kind of happened, and those three things sort of catalyzed, I think, something I never thought I would see happen. Just as such an influx of people like it was already happening, but just on a much slower timeline. People rediscovering their love for collectibles. There's something just like, without going into it too much, but just collecting cards. There's just something, especially if you did it as a kid. There's just something so relaxing, cathartic, therapeutic about collecting cards, and then the sort of gamification of it, of like being able to do it on apps on your phone, and forming communities, and like rushing to try and get cards, and like being able to make money doing it and stuff. Like all of those things just sort of make it really appealing. And so like people, you already saw this natural progression of people coming back in, people like myself, people like others, in similar situations. But like 2020, that trifecta of events, like it took a 10-year timeline of people who would have maybe naturally come in over the next 10 years, and it just smashed it into a few months. And then that momentum attracted all sorts of other people who might not have naturally come to cards, but because it was becoming such a cultural phenomenon, because people were making hand over fist money, and because the market was growing at an exponential rate, that attracted another layer of people who came in the 2020 era, who maybe they were coming from sort of adjacent industries, or maybe they were coming from, an influencer who had directed them here, or, maybe they were interested in getting some exposure to the business and infrastructure building side of the industry. But suddenly, like, not only did we have this rapid acceleration of people who were probably already going to come in anyway, but just happen immediately because of those triggering moments. But also then you just have this whole other layer of people who probably never would have come in. And also, most have probably left by now, that particular layer of the cake. And with them, they left in their wreckage quite the bubble. Okay, so, but, so that was the vibe of 2020. And then there was sort of like a content race to, especially among people who like weren't really ever here for the love of the cards, but were more so here for the opportunity to make money, for the opportunity to get clout, for the chance to sort of become influential in some sports adjacent field. A lot of people would like to be influential in the sports sector. Some of them saw cards as a way to do it. And some people just love to be loved. And, this was like a way for them to do it. Right. So like we saw like this race to become the face of the hobby from 2021, 22, 23. And that's when the canvas that once was blank not only became filled with colors and art and design, but eventually it got muddled. It got the artistry got foggy. It got the canvas got filled up too much. It no longer was a canvas at all. It became, just like a piece of postmodern art, just blobs everywhere.
No one knows what the hell they're looking at.
No, we don't. And so now there's been some correction, I think. So that's how I compare sort of that whole time period. Then you get to today, and I think a lot of the people who were gravitating towards sports cards because of the market upside, because of the rapid growth, because of the opportunity to make money in one way or another in the industry, like I think those people, for a variety of reasons, have checked out. I think one of the reasons is that there are attractive competing places to put money, even something as boring and safe as a treasury note, which 2 years are yielding 5% right now, and there's for some that's enough. It's especially after such a bull run in a number of markets, to be able to step back and just say, yeah, I'll just take 5% for a few years. I think that's attractive to some people who are money focused. I think there's concern, macroeconomic concern. And I also just think the novelty has worn off for a lot of people and who were here because it was novel in the first place. And now we're sort of at this point where, comparing it to 2016 and like that time, it's starting to feel more like that in a lot of ways. But the difference is when we were in, collecting cards in 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, there was this like slow momentum, this slow build that just felt like, we're part of something new, exciting, interesting. It's growing. It's cool. It's niche. And now we're on the complete other side of that. We're like, instead of being a part of a slow build, we're part of a slow demise right now. And it feels a little bit awkward. It's just like, yeah, I'm still loving collecting cards, but it's like, as I look at my collection, I just say, man, I bought this card in 2021 and I could have got it today for 30 to 40% of what I paid for it. Now, granted, it all balances out most likely in the grand scheme, and so you look at that and you just say, well, my philosophy as a lifetime collector is I'm going to collect through the ups, I'm going to collect through the downs, I'm going to collect at the exciting times, I'm going to collect at the boring times, and hopefully it balances out in the long run. But we've certainly been on a ride, man. I hope I captured that.
Oh, that was, 10 times the explanation I ever could have expected. That was a novel, Chris. If you type on like Chat GPT, state of the hobby, then versus now, I think that's what it would output.
Gosh.
After you copied it, I think it's going to go copy you, if anything. But so a couple of quick notes there that really stuck out to me. I guess, again, First off, thank you. I'm so happy having you on here because this is the kind of thing that I want to selfishly learn from you. And then the cool part is I get to record this and share it with others. Sure. So something that really stood out that you said that I want to just, if you could just, restate maybe in clear words. So you had said that when you first started, like 2016, and, that kind of era when you were getting in, you spent a lot of time, it sounded like just storing knowledge, learning from people who had been here a long time. Do you have any tips for like how you went about doing that? Clearly, like me talking to you here, I already feel like I just learned a ton, right? So obviously some part of it is just listening to folks who you think have a decent idea of what they're saying. But do you have any specific like actionable things you did to learn from these type of folks?
Yeah. I'm going to approach this question in a little bit of a weird way. So I think honestly, one of the downfalls of that, or one of the shortcomings I had when I first came into the hobby, was that because I had collected in the 90s, because I had these Beckett magazines, and I remembered what cards I liked the most, I remembered the whole experience of it, and because the hobby just felt kind of like a wild, wild west, especially at that time, I was a bit too cocksure. I was a bit too confident. And so I sort of, started forging my own way because I had this background in cards, and I just kind of, there's something about cards. I think it's one of the most appealing parts of it as a newcomer. There's something about it that just makes me as the collector feel like I'm just the master of this domain, I see the right way, and I know how to do this better than anybody, And I certainly didn't. But like there's an arrogance, and I see it happen when people come into the hobby to this day, and I can't be overly critical of it, because it was me. That was how I approach it too. It's like, I know what the best inserts are. I have strong opinions on the best inserts and the best Michael Jordan cards. I know what I'm talking about. There's also something about the message board format that invites that as well. Like, it's just you just want to reply to everything, just the comment section psychology. But okay, so what I would do was like I would love to read the opinions of others. So I would go on message boards, and like you would usually start from like a Google search, honestly, or I would stumble into like blogs or message board posts that are discussing Michael Jordan cards, and especially if like one particular card is of interest to me. And I would heavily rely on the Beckett magazines. And so like at that time, Beckett was producing this annual almanac sort of thing that like it would come out once a year. It would be this very thick magazine that would just cover everything, every card. And I would use it because like I would just go through it chronologically and just kind of, oh, this set and these were the pack odds, and this is the checklist, and this is usually there would be a little picture, a little black and white picture of the card, and just that would sort of be like a starting place for me. Would just be kind of going over all the checklists and stuff that you could find in that Beckett magazine. And then that would give me like a launching point to kind of then start digging in and researching stuff. But there's really not that much research to do after a while. Like there is, the more you can learn, there's too much information, too much complexity about the different silos of this industry and of these sets and sports and stuff. There's just too much for any one person to master at all, I think. But so like there's too much information for any person to ever truly know. But by the same token, the depth of the like there's a breadth of information, but the depth in any particular area, it's really not that much. You ultimately learn what the checklist consists of. You learn who the key players are. You can look at pack odds. You can look at population reports. You can look at market trends, see how much does this card sell for, how does it compare to other similar cards from the era. Like this is some of the research you can do to sort of learn about it. And then if you want to dig even deeper, like Josh on Cardboard Chronicles interviewed Jean Arena of Arena Design, which was she was one of the most influential artists and designers of cards in the 90s. Like I was always thirsting for things like that and even more. I wanted to know more than ever was available from a depth point of view. Like, I want to know what was the photographer thinking when they took this picture of Michael Jordan, and oh, by the way, what game did that picture come from? And like what shoes was he wearing, and who was in attendance at the game, and at what moments in the game did that picture happen, and like, how many points did he have in this game? And what was the thought behind the design of this card? Like, what did you model this after? Does this take inspiration from previous art or from previous artists? Like I wanted to know all those things, and that information just doesn't exist. So like the depth of information that you could get, I shouldn't say it doesn't exist, but it just nobody had ever put it together. So like Josh went and interviewed Gene, and like people have made it their personal projects to like photo match. This photo came from this card, and then they go look at a replay of the game or highlights from the game, and they identify where it came from and stuff. Like they start putting it together. Like, but yeah, I mean, the in terms of like accumulating and going in and getting information, it's really there's no manual, there's no textbook, there's just Google searching. I wouldn't trust ChatGPT. Also, let me just throw that out there to stay away from the chat bots for now. But you have Google searching, you have some YouTube rabbit holes to go down. Then there's the oral history or the word of mouth history, kind of like what we're doing right now, that you can get if you go to your local card shop and ask questions there, go to card shows, ask stuff there. Always, though, for sure, take everything with a grain of salt. But, that's sort of it, is like, there's just it's doing research, doing learning in this hobby. It for better or worse, it's totally self-guided, it's self-directed. And as far as as a researcher, as far as your creativity and interest goes, as far as your passion goes, that's how far you'll go researching.
That's an amazing, super interesting answer. And, there's some parallels there, because it's funny because, again, I get asked like fairly often, like, hey, how do you find those cards for grading? And my answer is very similar, kind of, which is funny. What reason I want to say it to what you just said, it's I have no answer. There's no guidebook. Just get creative, find sets you're passionate about, find those people who know the sets well. You can ask them about it. And that's kind of sounds like high level what you just shared. So I appreciate it. Very interesting. And the parallels there.
Sure.
Chris, while I have you, I want to make sure. Do you mind if I jump over to your Mount Rushmore of your collection?
Not at all. Let's do it.
Okay. So it should on YouTube here, everyone can see this. I think this is the freaking craziest Mount Rushmore you could ever have. So on the podcast, though, they obviously won't have a visual. So if you wouldn't mind just kind of stepping through, you can start with the Jokic here and just explain maybe what the card is, the importance, and then any acquisition story, super high level, like anything like that you want to share. I think we're going to get a lot of intel. Like we just talked about how to learn from people. Guys, this is how you're going to learn right here from Chris talking about the cards he's passionate about.
Yeah. All right. So let me, to the frustration maybe of some listener or viewers who I'm going to go in the chronological order in which I acquired them.
Perfect.
All right. So the first card, and I'll say what they are real quick for listeners, and then we'll go through. So I have the 97 PMG Red Michael Jordan, the 2018 Prism Gold Luka, the 2015 Prism Black Jokic, and the 2017 Prism Black Christian McCaffrey. And these cards represent 4 different eras of my collecting experience. So the first one is the 97 PMG Red Jordan. I acquired this one in 2018 with a funny story that I won't go into now. Suffice it to say, I met a guy who was working in Vegas as a professional poker player. I met him at a car dealership in Southern California so that I could buy this card and so that he could take the cash proceeds and buy a car that he then drove back to Vegas to use as an Uber driver to supplement his poker income. So that was 2018. So I've had that since 2018. As soon as I got it, I graded it. It previously was in a BGS holder. And as soon as I got it, I took it and graded it on site, walked through with PSA, which was the first time I'd ever done something like that. It was really exciting and fun. And it was terrible when I got the grade back. But other than that, it was really fun.
Could you explain, Chris, before I don't mean to interrupt, but could you explain the thought process from going BGS to PSA? Was it like authenticity's sake or was there a specific reason? I was just really curious on that.
So the card, first of all, it was slabbed backwards in the BGS.
Oh, no. A PMG Red was slabbed backwards?
Yeah, I mean, errors happen, mistakes happen.
Yeah, yep.
But yeah, it was backwards. And the owner, the guy that I purchased the card from, he was the one who took it out of its BGS holder. Mm-hmm. And that was obviously a big factor why. But he also liked it raw. He liked to have cards in raw condition, as some people do, especially more old school guys. But I didn't want that. I definitely took into consideration that it had been graded at BGS 8. But ultimately, I didn't want to travel with the card to Texas. At that time, I lived in Southern California, and I was going to law school. So I didn't really have time or the desire to make that trip. So instead, I just took it right to PSA, which was just a short drive away from me. And yeah, and plus, PSA is notoriously more difficult on grading certain 90s cards. And, that's that actually tips the scale towards wanting to put it with Beckett. But I knew that going in, I was going to get a tough grade, and I did. But I also knew that putting the PSA holder was the best holder to have the card in ultimately. And I like how it looks.
I just say the red on red's pretty sweet. That is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's like a very small thing to most people, but had it been a BGS 8.5, I would have probably tried to put it back in the Beckett holder and have them graded again, because the BGS 8.5 is a silver label, or at this time, BGS 8 was a white label, BGS 8.5 was a silver label. And I always thought that the BGS 8.5 silver label looked really sharp contrasted against a PMG Red. But since it wasn't going to get a silver label, I like the way the PSA label looks, which is, like you said, the red trim around the PSA label. set against the PMG red color design. Really nice, really nice. So,
Awesome.
Okay, so that's the story behind that one. And then, and part of the story behind that one too is that I had to sell. So, like, I first started off accumulating Michael Jordan inserts, Noise Boys, A Cut Above, Scoring Kings, these type of cards like that. I had at one point I had a whole 2-row full of them, and I would pick them up as I could, one at a time. Just if one comes up on eBay, I don't really care about the grade. As long as it's graded, that's great. But as soon as the next one comes up, I'm getting that one. And eventually I had 60, 80, 100 inserts, maybe. I don't know exactly how many, but it was a solid amount. But then once I got the inserts, I just became obsessed with the serial numbered parallels, like the PMG red, but like platinum medallions, cards like that. I just became obsessed with those. And so when this card became available, I had to scramble to sell a bunch of those inserts so I could take the proceeds and put it into that card. So that card was like a real turning point evolution in my collecting.
One thing I was just going to throw this out there too, Chris. It's really interesting you say that because the other two guests I've had, and pretty much everyone I've seen, these really hardcore collectors, you guys are like not afraid to pump 40 cards into one card, even if the value isn't close.
Yeah.
I respect that. I think that's my big takeaway from that story right there too.
Yeah, no, it's completely right. That's completely right. I've become lazier nowadays. I was more ambitious back then to be like, yeah, I'm going to sit on here on Facebook Marketplace and eBay, and I'm going to sell all these cards to get the proceeds to get this other one. Or maybe I was just maybe my circumstances as a college student, or a law student with no income was probably a factor too. But those were the glory days. So got that card in the fall of 2018, and around that same time, Christina and I were getting more involved in our local card scene, going to trade nights, going to the local shop. And when you go to the shop, you want to buy something, So like we're always sort of tinkering around with like buying new product and stuff, which granted was very affordable back then. And yeah, when 2018 Prism came out, that winter/fall, it was around like November or December, like we just started buying boxes, and the boxes were around $200, $200 to $225. And we would buy a box when we could. And, eventually I put together some base sets, and, we would also like go buy the blasters from Walmart and stuff, and like in the megas. And, we tried putting together a pink ice parallel set and stuff. And like, as a byproduct of collecting that particular year of Prism, it just so happened and just so lined up that Luka was emerging as a special rookie. And it was during winter break of 2018-19 so like December of 18 and January of 19, we traveled back to the Northeast to visit with Christina's family. And we made a detour to go to Dave and Adam's storefront in upstate New York. And so we went out there and we bought some hobby boxes, and out of one of those hobby boxes came a Luka orange out of 49 parallel, which was like about an $800 to $1,000 card at the time, which was, as far as I can recall, that's by far the best card we ever pulled. And so we just got really excited about it, and that sort of whet our appetite to collect Luka. And then I started I subscribed to League Pass. I started watching all of his games, and I just got hooked on watching him play. The hobby led me to being a huge fan. The hobby ultimately led to moving to Dallas to follow his career up close from the American Airlines Center. That's crazy to think about. But as that season rolls on, the Mavs ultimately, flame out. But like, we went and watched Luka during that year, during his rookie year. We went to the Staples Center at that time and watched him play the Clippers. He had a triple-double. We had him sign a card before the game, a Prism base card. We had him sign it because I had like dozens of those from opening all those boxes. So we had him sign one. I obviously still have that in my collection with the ticket from the game and stuff. And like, so it was just a fun experience getting to watch him play in person and everything. But, the season ends. National Treasures comes out around that time. We just so happened to be at a local hobby shop, and like an NTRPA, it gets pulled from one of the boxes. And like, we approach the guy. We do a partial trade, partial cash deal to buy that card. So like now we've got this Luka NTRPA, and we've got some pretty sweet Prism cards of his, some silvers and an orange. And I'm like, well, look, if we've gone this far, it's kind of like that Jordan playbook where it's like, we've come this far, like, I don't want just like this smattering of decent cards. I want to combine them all into one best card or a few best cards. So this Luka Prism Gold shows up on eBay, and it's sitting there for a few days. And, it was just so happens that summer I was summering at a law firm. So, and if you don't know, they pay you extremely well during that summer at a law firm to do nothing, but just like you're learning, but you're totally not valuable at all. But it's sort of like a courting where like they bring you in, and then you're, if you like them and they like you, you ultimately come back after law school. So I'm just kind of sitting in the office one day, and I just, say, screw it. I've got a paycheck or two, and I've got some Lukas that I want to, sell or trade. And I eventually just bought that Prism Gold, and and just kind of took it and just sat on it. And then we sold our other Lukas, our other, like the orange. We ended up selling that and stuff. And so that's the story behind the second card here, the Luka Prism Gold. Is like, that was just the best Luka card that I could get at that time, and I just took a swing at it and we got it. And now it's, one of my most cherished cards. So that card was acquired in the summer of 2019, early summer of 2019. Then the next card acquired here was the Jokic Prism Black, which was acquired a year ago, a little over a year ago. So I got this card in, I think, about April of 2022, when Jokic already had one MVP, and he was definitely looking at a real possibility of getting a second. And the thing that got me interested in Jokic was watching Luka for the years between like his rookie year and 2 years ago, which is about 3 seasons, watching him, trying to figure out, is he the real deal, made me start learning about analytics in the NBA, and made me start listening to expert analysis, and really start figuring out what's the realistic trajectory for this guy, how good could he really be, and what's all the tools at my disposal that could help me determine that. And it also just, when it turned out that he like scores really well on those things, then it also becomes fun to like learn about them and study them and use them to learn about other players. Well, all throughout that research process, it just so happens that this guy Jokic is, at the top of all of these analytics categories. Like the ones where I'm like really excited that like Luka's, 5th in 538 Raptor or something. Like he's first by a mile. And so like eventually like it just wore down on me seeing it like month after month and then year after year. It just finally wore away me. And I was just like, all right, he won the first MVP. And I saw, the run that they made in the bubble where they went through the Jazz and the Clippers. And I was like, well, they look like they have a good team. And this guy's just a statistical all-timer. And now he's got an MVP. And I just gave in. I was just like, all right, like these are the metrics that I've learned so much about. And they're all telling me that this guy is the best thing going. So I need to start taking this guy seriously. So I started watching some games. I didn't really get into it at first. Like Luka's style is so pleasant to watch. He's just such a captivating athlete to watch. Just the stuff he does is just like it just makes you jump out of your seat when that step back three goes in or whatever. And Jokic isn't quite like that. It's a totally different form of greatness to appreciate. But I learned it. I watched it. I learned how to appreciate it. And it taught me a lot about basketball along the way. And so I just said, you know what? Jokic is not Jordan, like not obviously not basketball wise, and obviously not hobby wise. You know, Jokic isn't Shaq. Jokic isn't Kobe. Jokic isn't Curry. Jokic isn't, you know, Ja Morant. Yeah, just like just looking at it, it's just like, you know, it dawned on me after some thinking that, hey, look, I'm not a whale in this hobby. I'm not, but I could maybe get his best card. And like having collected Jordan for years and then Luka for a few less years, but still an extended period, like in like the Jordan PMG Red, it's a great card. It's a maybe Jordan's most beautiful card in my opinion. But there's 90 copies, you know, and Jordan has, you know, these 6 iconic playing years one of ones. He has the PMG Gem Masters one of one, you know, and then he has the PMG Green, and then he has the Essential Credentials Now out of 9. And it's just like the PMG Red, like it might not even be a top 10 Michael Jordan card from the 90s. You know, it's like right there on the border. And then you look at the Luka Prism Gold, and it's like, okay, this is a great card, but Luka has a National Treasures Logo Man RPA one of one, and he has a flawless Logo Man RPA one of one. And then he has what I think is his best card, which is his Prism Black one of one. You know, and then he has an NT RPA Gold out of 10, and he has an Immaculate Logo Man RPA 1 out of 1, and he has a Prism Nebula 1 of 1. And like, I don't know if the Prism Gold is like a top 10 card. It's close, you know. It's just like what the PMG Red is to the Jordan canon. The Prism Gold is maybe to the Luka canon. You know, it's a really great card, but it's not the top dog. It's not his best card. With Jokic, it through my research, it became clear that the Prism Black is far and away his best card. He doesn't have a National Treasures Logo Man RPA 1 of 1. He doesn't have any other Prism 1 of 1 rookies. Probably the closest competitor to this card is that he according to checklists, he has an Immaculate RPA Logo Man 1 of 1. I have spoken to some collectors who say they remember seeing it, but there isn't a picture of it that we could track down. But this Prism Black 1 of 1 is it. This is his best card. And it just sort of, I said, like, you know, I get like inspired or maybe even jealous of other collectors of Michael Jordan, Luka, who could rightfully say they have the best card of this player or one of the best cards of this player. And it's like, I know financially, I know from a resources point of view, from a timing point of view, I'm never going to be able to say that about Michael Jordan or Luka, who are my first 2 prized PCs, my most favorite players to collect. But you know what? Maybe there is a chance I could do it with Jokic. So that was the thinking there. And it was like, and the reason why Jokic made it so compelling was because this was almost all the way through his second MVP season. And it had become abundantly clear to me and to the analysts that I was listening to that he's the best player in the world. And he going on a few years now. But ESPN wasn't talking about him that way. And NBA broadcasts weren't talking about him that way. And because his teammates, Murray and Porter, were injured, you know, the team wasn't having team success, even though he was having these amazing statistical seasons. So there was like this opportunity I almost felt where, like, I kind of know how good he is, but few others see it right now. And so I just made a very aggressive offer to buy this card. And the collector, who's one of the great Jokic collectors, with or without this card, he's got a collection that still puts my Jokic collection to shame, but he was willing to let go of the card. And so that's the story behind that one, is that was my attempt to fulfill a hobby goal, which is like get the best card of a guy who's the best athlete for a limited period of time. So like the Prism Black, especially the Jokic. It's a beautiful card, but it's not. I would say it's the fourth most aesthetically pleasing of the four. But that card was like it was conceptual to a certain degree. It was an accomplishment to want to be able to secure a card like that. And now, I mean, we traveled to Denver a few times now to watch him play. If they make the finals, I think we'll be going to finals games in Denver to watch him play. And I've become such an admirer and a fan of Jokic that that's the story that card symbolizes my growth as a student of both the hobby and the sport. So that's the story behind that one. Then the final one, this one will be a much briefer story, is the McCaffrey Prism Black Finite 1/1 rookie, which was the most recent card acquired. I got it last fall. McCaffrey was just like my football guy to collect. Like, quarterbacks were too expensive, and I just had a connection with McCaffrey because he helped me win my first ever fantasy football championship. And I just had a connection to him. I liked him, and I knew that, at that time he was on the Panthers. They probably were never going to be contenders, but he would put up these great stats. One of only 3 players in NFL history to have 1,000-yard rushing and 1,000-yard receiving season. And he owns 2 of the top 10 fantasy seasons ever played. So, I like that. I respect that. I can stand on solid footing when I defend what he's accomplished as an athlete, while acknowledging that he's not the GOAT. He's not the best football player. He's not a quarterback. He's not ever going to be the epicenter of any hobby focus, but he checked enough boxes for me to give me a football player to be interested in following and collecting. But so then I started looking for this card. I couldn't find it. It was just months and years rolling by, and I could never find it. Put out a ridiculous bounty to try and bring it out, and even that didn't work. But eventually the card shows up in a display case at a card shop in the Pacific Northwest, and a few people who had remembered the bounty, probably because it was so ridiculous, contacted me and said, "Hey, this card showed up." And one guy said, "You know what? I'm going to buy this card. Are you still going to honor your bounty?" And I said, "Yes, I will." And he said, "Okay, I'm going to buy this card. I'll bring it down. Let's meet up in Southern California at our because we both had met each other years ago at a trade night at the Bullpen Card Shop in Los Angeles." And he said, "Okay, you know what? I'll get this card. Let's meet in LA, and I'll sell it to you." So that was the story behind the McCaffrey rookie, and that was like climbing the mountaintop of McCaffrey collecting, was getting that card.
That was amazing. This is like a movie right now. Like, I'm just sitting here. I doesn't even feel like I'm recording. It's just like this is a novel, Chris. You got to write a book sometime.
Austin, I'm just glad somebody cares. I am pleased beyond belief to be able to tell these stories, and that you are listening. It means a lot.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm sure there's going to be hundreds of others as well. So, Chris, I know you're a busy guy, so I respect your time here. If you don't mind, can we wrap up with like a fast 5? These are just 5 quick questions. First thing that comes to mind. All right. So, first one, Jordan PMG Green or your left kidney?
You only need one kidney, right?
I think so, yeah.
Then we'll go with the PMG Green.
Okay.
As long as it's medically sound.
Yeah, medically sound. Yeah, I think so. I'm not a doctor, but we'll say it is. MJ game, maybe a little tricky, but Michael Jordan game, you go back in time. Is there a game that you'd like to go to? Just if you go to one game courtside.
Has to be Game 6 of the 98 finals, where he scores like 47 of the team's 85 points or something, or 45 of the team's 80. So something like that. He hits the game winner over Russell with 6 seconds. Like, it's got to be that game.
Perfect. And then I saw you had a background in music. We didn't touch on it, but very, very interesting. We'll have to chat again another time. But are you a Tupac or a Biggie guy?
Tupac.
Both? Tupac? Okay.
I mean, both. If both is an option, I take both. But I always like Tupac's music a bit more.
Awesome. Then if you had to collect soccer or hockey, purely from like, I'm going to start watching the sport, pick a player, what are you taking?
It would have to be hockey. It would have, even though like soccer has a lot of appeal because like you have these huge global stars, and when you have the World Cup, it's just everybody cares about it. Like everybody cares about it. But hockey is cool because like I've been following the Dallas Stars a little bit, who are down 0-2 right now, but could make the Stanley Cup. And I just, I've watched them play a few times this year. So hockey's just a little more immediate, a little more proximate. And I think I could get behind hockey. Yeah. Like Wayne Gretzky, man, that guy won 8 MVPs.
There's your stat guy right there.
Yes. There's no debate who I would collect. It would be the great one.
Awesome. And then final question. So pineapple on pizza, yes or no?
Pineapple on pizza. I'm a no, but I will eat it.
Okay.
I'm not strict about it.
Respectable.
Okay.
Awesome, Chris. Again, thank you so much. This was a blast. I was so excited when you said you would be willing to do this. So again, just really appreciate it. You can find Chris on Instagram at Chris_HOJ, Chris House of Jordans, many Jordans. And then be sure to follow him again on Instagram and check out the crossover every Friday with him, Josh, and Christina. So yeah, thanks, Chris. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, man.